Well, hey everyone, welcome to Stewardship Leader, where we help church leaders teach and lead on biblical stewardship with confidence, clarity, and conviction. In today's episode, we're diving into something that sits underneath almost every financial struggle people face, and that's behavior. My guest today is DonJay Rice, a financial behavior expert and coach who helps people understand not just what they're doing with their money, but why they're doing it. If you've ever wondered why budgeting alone doesn't seem to create lasting change, this conversation is going to open your eyes in a really helpful way. DonJay, welcome to Stewardship Leader.
Hey, Leo, thanks for having me. It's an honor to be here, and we'll have a lot of fun.
Well, it's my pleasure to have you. And I always want to start by having our guests share their story and also what led them to the work that they're doing. So, what led you to become a financial behavior coach?
Yeah, for me, I was a financial advisor for about 28 years. And during that time, I made my specialization to help clients in financial behaviors. I found out that really you can build these great portfolios and you can talk about budgeting and saving and all these things, but it was really the behavior. And what was frustrating for me during that time was my clients I could see really needed more time on the behavior than I was able to give. You have a lot of duties as a financial advisor, and I kept seeing my time getting squeezed on how I could help clients with their financial behaviors. And so it's a really long story, but one where God walked with me, and I think the Spirit revealed things to me. And so, in short, I sold my practice, waited on God to show me more what He wanted me to do next. And that's where He led me into financial behavior coaching full time.
Hmm. Well, that's great. I love that you started with financial planning and it being an advisor, and then really saw that there was a deeper need, not just the financial information. We'll get into some of that today because a lot of times people have this misunderstanding. Couldn't we just teach people how to budget? If someone knows how to budget, wouldn't that remove unwanted financial behaviors? How would you answer that question?
Yeah, I guess I would say, Leo, I wish we could, but the data really shows otherwise. There's a survey that was recently done, and it said 74% of Americans who budget actually admit that it's not working for them.
Mm,
And they say that these people will say that their spending consistently exceeds their budget. So the fact is, how we use money each day is really controlled by the emotional side of our brain. And when we think about simple math, budgeting is a logical side of our brain. It's the math side of our brain.
yeah.
And so the emotional side of our brain is actually much faster to react than the logical side. And that's due to our emotional side is wired for survival. So
Mm,
when the emotional side of our brain reacts, it, it to put it in kind of layman's terms, I guess it tells the logical side, hey, buddy, take a back seat. I got this. And we wind up making emotional decisions that cost us dearly. So we have to acknowledge that the emotional side is very powerful when
mm,
it comes to our money behaviors, our actions, and our emotions around money.
yeah. Well, I love the way you phrase that. I don't know that I've ever quite heard it just addressed that way, that our emotions process that information much faster rather than our logic does, which is the way we think about our finances, at least from a mathematical standpoint. Like when things don't add up, we tend to think, well, it's a math issue or we need to stop spending, doing whatever. But it's an emotional reaction. And that's a lot of times just overwhelms us, right? That's the first
Yeah.
thing that we feel. And that's where that triggers everything else. And I think this is why couples have such a hard time communicating about money because it's not about the rational. It's not about the numbers. It could be very intelligent people talking about the numbers, but it becomes a very emotional conversation. What about the financial education side? Will more financial education fix these financial behaviors?
Well, I used to think that was the answer. That's why I became a financial advisor in the first place.
Mm,
But what I saw was years of observing where financial education had limited results. And it was really learning about the brain and how it works. And what I discovered, what's really interesting is learning about finance can actually hinder or even block uh, adoption of better financial behaviors. And it's to get a little bit geeky here, I guess. It's called the intention action gap, and sometimes you'll see it referred to as the knowledge behavior gap. So when while gaining knowledge, I mean, obviously that's needed, right? But it tricks our brain into feeling satisfied. When we gain a bunch of financial knowledge and think, well, if I just learn enough and read enough books and learn all this stuff about finance, I'll be fine. It will stop my behavior of spending or hoarding or whatever. What happens is that gaining of knowledge tells the brain, hey, you've done something. Really, I haven't. I've just put more stuff up there in the brain. And so the brain will substitute the learning of financial concepts for the actual doing of the work. Uh, so, more financial education is definitely part of the equation. Sure, it is. But if we're not addressing the financial behaviors at the same time, if we think that education is the only answer, sending people through more money classes, the brain is going to be telling itself, hey, I've addressed this issue, when really we haven't scratched the surface.
Hmm. That kind of reminds me when I've done a bunch of financial coaching. It was the reason I got hired at a church is to do that, and then I trained a bunch of coaches to do the same. And to be frankly, very honest about this, we just didn't have a lot of success with it, and I had different kind of interpretation of why that wasn't happening. But I remember early on, I was doing a lot of the coaching myself until I built a team. And one of the things that always kind of surprised me and was a bit aggravating was that I would look at people who would come in and we would sit down, we would create a plan. I would send them away with some homework to do and then come back. And we had a process that we had developed to walk them through. And it always surprised me how they seem to have no willpower. At least that's how I interpret it. I thought, what is wrong with these people? Like, they're logical, they're smart people. Like, why aren't they just doing it? So, where does willpower come in? Because from my perspective, and sounds really bad, but from my perspective, I thought that's all it takes is just willpower. Like, I know what I had to do when I was in a financial mess. I just buckled down, did it, and it worked. Like, why can't you do that? And so, just telling ourselves to quit or to stop spending, doesn't that solve the issue? Because I know it didn't,
Yeah.
but I want your explanation as to why that didn't work. I know now why it didn't work, but I'd love your deeper understanding of this because you've been at this and worked with this a lot more closely than I have.
Yeah, you're exactly right. Just telling people, to white knuckle it or just stop. No, don't. It actually, what happens is the moment you tell yourself that or you tell someone else to do that, you actually accidentally make spending more powerful or the behavior, the hoarding, whatever it is, the financial enabling, you
Hmm,
make it more powerful, not less powerful.
hmm,
And think of it this way. What if I told you to say, hey, stop thinking about pink elephants? Leo, you're not thinking about pink elephants now, right now, are you? Like, I can't get it out of my head. Right. And so the brain, the way it processes instruction really isn't the way we think it does. It doesn't quiet it. It doesn't quiet the urge. It spotlights it. And
hmm,
so telling someone to not think about something, it keeps bringing it back to the front of their mind. And so really instead of reducing the desire, it actually strengthens it. And then there's the human side of it. I mean, none of us like to feel restricted. And so the second spending or whatever it is, right, turns into I'm not allowed. That part of the brain wants to push back to regain that freedom. So that's where you'll hear sometimes people, maybe they've really restricted themselves on a budget. And all of a sudden they'll say, I've been really good. I deserve this. And that's them pushing back and that's them trying to rationalize. Right. And then on top of that, we have where willpower alone doesn't hold over time, it fades. And when it starts to fade, even a small slip can feel like failure, which really turns into spending more, not less. It turns into this surrender. Well, I just can't do it. So let's just, let loose here. But it's restriction. The strategy of restriction really comes down to it that it's not how the brain is wired. And so what I like to do is actually what works is shifting that approach away from control and into intention. So it's not that I can't spend, but I'm choosing where this goes.
hmm,
And so, I think I like words like the word budget. And I try to really not use the word budget with my clients because a lot of us see that word as restrictive. And so instead, I like to use the word spending plan. And
Mhm.
those words imply, we have a choice. We've made this plan of how we want to use our money. And I like to think about monthly income as just a big pot of water. So we can use the water however we want. If we've got a big pot of water and that's all we got in the pot, we can use the water to wash the car. Well, if I do, there's no water to cook with. There's no water to bathe with. And so I really talk to my clients about their income like a pot of water. And so it's a matter of how they choose to use that bucket, how they choose to use that monthly income. And so letting them know that, yeah, there's choices. You can choose to use it however you want, but there's also, you may not get some other choices that are pretty important. So it's really about not trying to force behavior, but leaning into or changing it through the thought of I have choice, but understanding the pros and cons to that choice.
Mm. Yeah, I mean, I can definitely resonate with that. I think one of the things that I've learned over time as because I remember early on when I was teaching on this topic and doing small groups with people, it was very much rules based. A lot of the curriculum 20 some years ago was the word of God says this about this, this, and this. This is what we're supposed to do. Yes, no,
Yeah.
right? It was very hard to get people to, and again, even my generation and older, we tended to just kind of follow rules. So it wasn't that far. It wasn't like an absurd thing to teach that way to tell people like, here's what God's word says. Here's what debt is all about and why we're supposed to stay away from it. Here's what saving is all about and why God encourages it. And so nothing wrong with all of that, but it came across as very much a rules-based type of system. And then of course people didn't succeed or they drop out, we'd lose them halfway through and wonder what's going on here. And again, we always thought, well, and I remember kind of using language around like maybe some people just need more time. They need, they're not ready to make those decisions. There's things that are holding them back and they'll either have to come back or unfortunately maybe suffer a little bit more and then they'll be motivated. And I know that sounds really harsh, but I just wasn't trained. I didn't know exactly what was going on. And my personal experience was when I had financial hardship, I just looked for the answer. And for me, it was logical. Like I can't spend more than I make. And I just made the decision. But then I found that there were so many other things that were affecting people. It wasn't just a knowledge. Um, it wasn't any of that. And sometimes it led to those kind of situations where people had to continue to come back until they had breakthrough. And one of the things that came across quite often was just this, and I think you shared this with me, that Christians can carry a unique kind of shame when it comes to money. And I think that comes from our religious background or just the biblical references that we have that help us to kind of adopt this idea that money is meant to be given away, be used for kingdom purposes, and somehow we're not supposed to use any of it for ourselves. Or if we do, only very little, and we're not supposed to have any fun with it. So can you unpack that shame and what that looks like for us?
Yeah, I think Christians do carry a lot of shame, and probably a special type of shame when it comes to money because it's this thought that, and we have this a lot in Christianity. I've got to do it perfectly, and so I'm
Mm,
not managing money perfectly according to maybe what the Bible says about money or what maybe I perceive the Bible says about money. And so there's a lot of shame around that, this feeling of inadequacy and giving, tithing, generosity, um, and there's shame around that. And then there's, I think sometimes when I work with clients, I'll see this. There's this shame that if I enjoy any of my money, well, that's just being selfish.
mm,
And so this all leads to this hiding of financial struggles from others. If we look at a budgeting class, let's say we have, a lot of churches run budgeting classes, and and what church member takes the budgeting class and then in church, and then the church leader comes up to him and says, "Hey, it was great to have you in class. How's that all working?" You know, and there's this shame, like I say, yeah, that didn't work for me. Like I'm really struggling with gluttony.
yeah.
Um, and so in a religious setting, judgment creeps in. If I tell the minister this, he or she's going to think, well, I'm just a greedy person and I'm not a good Christian. And I don't want to accept that God owns it all. So we let our shame really keep our problems hidden, and that keeps that keeps our healing for our money behaviors blocked. And so, yeah, I think with Christians, we carry a extra shame when it comes to money.
Yeah. Where do some of these behaviors actually come from? What are some real examples that you might share to help us better understand it?
Yeah, when we think of our behaviors, think of our fears. Our behaviors are really driven by our fears around money. And so if I have a fear of safety, I'll hoard money. If my big fear is I won't be loved, I might financially enable my children or others. Fear of conflict. Fear of conflict can actually lead to overspending.
Hmm.
And what I mean by that, let me give you a good example, because sometimes that takes people back a little bit. So, Leo, let's say you and you've said, "Hey, DonJay, why don't our families go on vacation together?" And I've already there's this place that I know, and it's pick the state, right, whatever, and we'll stay at XYZ, right? And so I'm thinking at first like I can't afford that, right? But here's the other thing: my fear, if I can stay in the logical side, right? I can say, well, I can't afford that. How do I explain that to Leo? But then my fear creeps in. Well, what if I tell Leo no? Like that's conflict, right? I may lose friendships over this. And so I quickly agree, like, yeah, Leo, we'll do that. That sounds great. And then the credit card bill arrives, right? So it's that fear. And it's just easier to say yes than to sit in the conflict because for me,
Hmm.
I have a fear of conflict. And so fear of pain can lead us to gluttony. When we fill our days with experiences and things trying to block any tough emotional feelings. And then there's that feeling, that fear of not being enough. And so when I don't feel like I'm enough, I might tend to overspend to try to impress others. I might overachieve, workaholism. So, it's really in our deep-seated fears of how people perceive us and that fear of acceptance and safety and all those things.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah, that's really good. That's really good. That's a great example too, because how many of us have faced something very similar to that, and
Yeah.
instead of making the right financial decision, and we avoid it, and it's because of that. It's some form of shame, but it's avoiding conflict and whatever caused us to interpret that as a conflict. It may not be obvious if you and I are friends and you're telling me like, hey, that's a little bit outside of our comfort zone as far as financially speaking. I wouldn't judge you for that, but something in your past, my past, might make us act differently. I think that's what you're really saying. Our behaviors always is due to something else that's happened in our past, not necessarily the actual conversation itself that we're having. It's always loaded because we don't come to the table as a blank slate. We have other things. Now, you
Yeah.
talk about something called the 180 effect. What is that and why is that important?
Yeah, I think that's really important for anyone who's working in the coaching industry or even in ministry. And it's when I think about it's basically to remind myself the 180 effect is a term I came up with. And it's basically to remind myself that whenever I sit down with a client is not to assume I know the answer already to the questions I'm going to ask. And so
Hmm.
let me give you an example. I've had clients refer to me, and w- in one example, the person referring them said, their friend just liked to hoard money, and that was their problem. And the bank, they had this huge bank account balance spent of saving and checking, and it was just growing, growing, growing. And so their friend took that as well. A bigger bank account balance means that you've got a problem with money from a hoarding standpoint.
Hmm.
And as I worked with that client, what I found out is it wasn't hoarding, it was avoiding. They were avoiding their bank account balance. They were avoiding even looking at it because money terrified them. And then I had another person that was referred to me, and it was a person who'd recently been divorced. And she was spending money really rapidly. And her friend said, well, she's just sad, she's alone now. And so she's sad. And as I dug into that with the client, I found out she wasn't sad. She was angry. She had been in this controlling marriage. No one knew it. And this spouse had been controlling every single penny, right down to grocery bill to diapers to everything. And so this spending was really this act of rebellion that she finally had freedom, but still feeling she was here again, those messages from her past. She was still feeling the restriction. And
Hmm.
this was her way of rebelling against it. So I think it's really important for us, to realize no two individuals are the same. Their motives aren't the same. Their past money stories of why they do what they do and how we react aren't the same. And so the symptoms, the actions may look identical, but the healing and what's behind it, could be totally different.
Yeah. Well, I love the fact that you said that you this 180 effect is approaching it without thinking you know the answer. And so many times when we're coaching people financially, we think it is a financial problem, or at least we're comfortable with addressing those questions more than the hidden questions, right? So we tend to address it from that perspective. It's like whatever financial question they have, I know how to answer that. I have experience. I know, I've been successful at doing it myself. I've coached a lot of people. And I think that's such wisdom to not approach it as if you know, just because it may seem like a direct question. Most of the time, it's not. It's usually not a money situation that they struggle with. It's something else. It's behavior. So that's really good. So I'm curious of some of the exercises that you use with your clients. Can you give us some examples, maybe a glimpse of what that would look like?
Sure. Yeah. So one of there's several that I use. I have a library of resources and things like that. But one I think that's important for everybody to understand because we can all use this is what I call a visualization exercise. And what's really cool about it is it's the same stuff that your high performing athletes do. And so, when we visualize something, our brain, if we'll visualize it enough on repeat, what's really neat is our brain does not know what has been created and what's reality. It can't tell
Hmm.
the difference. And
Yeah.
so that's a really neat way to rewire and retrain our brains toward better behavior. And so with that, what I encourage my clients to do is write out a script, write out a scene, kind of a movie scene, and they're watching themselves. But they're also kind of in the scene, they're feeling it. And then once we've got that really written out in detail, they visualize that 1 minute a day, just 1 minute. And so the key thing is, and this is where sometimes we miss it on visualization. We don't want to visualize just the success. So for my example, I'll use an example here. My problem is I love to shop for clothes, right? I don't want to visualize myself just quickly walking by the front window of my favorite store and just whistling like there is no problem. I really want to visualize the struggle a little bit. And so I want to visualize myself walking up to that window, finding something that caught my eye and having something that I can say to myself. And I say this in the visualization, right? The same phrase every time. And so I see myself, I hear myself say, in 6 months, you won't be able to even remember this cool jacket is in your closet. And then visualizing myself walking away and feeling that sense of completeness, feeling that sense of like, hey, I conquered this. And the more senses we can use in the visualization, even the better. So let's say it's a leather jacket, it's a leather store that I really love. I want to be able to visualize myself walking up to that store and maybe somebody's opening the door and I smell that leather and it smells so good to me. And I see the leather and I see that jacket, and maybe I even hear the cars going down the street or whatever. That the more senses I can introduce in that to feel that struggle, to feel that temptation, and then to hear myself say, in 6 months you're going to forget this is in your closet, and then to see myself walk away, to feel those sense of accomplishment and pride.
Mm.
I'm retraining my brain. I'm rewiring my brain. And so when that happens in real life, right, I come by the store and I'm like, oh, there it is, right? I feel so like, whew, that looks great. What's going to happen is my brain is going to take that reel that I created of myself, that little movie, and it's going to go, oh, and here's what you do next. You
Hmm.
tell yourself, you ain't even going to find that in your closet in 6 months. You're not even going to remember it. Um, and so it's a way that in real life, right, the real comes back. And so it's a neat exercise, and my clients will just go. And for those that may be working with people and they're like, boy, I don't know if they're going to be doing visualization. That just seems kind of weird, right? All of our your famous athletes, Lindsey Vaughn, which most of us know the name Lindsey Vaughn. Lindsey Vaughn, when she goes down the slope, she'll go down and then she'll visualize herself doing it 1,000 times, a
Mm,
thousand, which is just wild. Michael Phelps, when Michael Phelps won his, I think it was 9 gold medals in the Olympics.
mhm,
One of the golds he won, he didn't have his eye goggles on all the way, and as soon as he hit the water, his goggles actually flooded with water, and he could not see. He couldn't see. So visualization helped him be able to go from muscle memory of feeling that. And he didn't need to know where his competitors were at or where the end was at. He just needed to know his pace and all those things. So,
mm.
so yeah, if we've got anybody out there listening and they're like, well, that sounds really great, but boy, I think my clients may push back a little bit. Just tell them, do you want to be Michael Phelps? Do you want to be Lindsey Vaughn? Do you like gold medals? So,
No, I find that very, very fascinating because I'm aware of visualization. I've studied it before. I understand the whole concept and how it works. And it totally makes sense that if you already practice that and you do it often enough, that your mind, your memory will bring that back. Like, hey, you've been
yeah,
here before. It's that deja vu. Like it just automatically kicks in because your brain is designed to make sense of your surrounding. And so in those kind of situations, it would automatically kick in and remind you, like, hey, we've been through this scenario. Here's what happens next. So that totally makes sense. I think it's brilliant that you're using that. I think it does work. Yeah, it may seem weird at first for people, but I think it's definitely something that for some who really struggle, because I know from time to time I do run across people who have, I mean, they generally want to stop spending. They just can't help
yeah,
themselves. They just
yeah,
feel like they're not even in control in that situation. And I think this could be a way that they can begin to practice that when there's no danger. They're not in the store. They don't have to pull out the
yeah,
credit card. They can just walk through that and develop that resistance to it and just be able to process through it in a healthy way. So
yeah.
totally, totally agree with that. I think it's brilliant. Well, we're running out of time for this episode. I know we're going to get into the how a little bit further, like how to actually help people change in the next episode. But for someone listening who wants to go deeper or connect with you, where should they go?
Yeah, so there's 3 places they could go. One is to my website, drumbeatofwealth.com. They can sign up for the newsletter. I'm always trying to share information in the newsletter that would help people from that standpoint, and different exercises to understanding money behaviors at a deeper level. So
Right.
that's one spot. So I'd encourage them definitely do that. Others would be on social media. I'm really active on Instagram under Drumbeat of Wealth, which is my company's name, and then under in on LinkedIn, I'm active there under my name, DonJay Rice.
All right. Well, awesome. Well, this was incredibly helpful. And I really appreciated this conversation because it shifts the focus from the external behavior to the internal transformation. And that's where real discipleship really happens. We know that. If we're going to help people experience freedom in their finances, we have to go deeper than budgets and tools. We have to help them understand what's driving their decisions. So, Donjay, thank you for being with us and for serving our listeners so well today.
Hey, thank you, Leo. It's always a joy being with you.
Well, in our next episode, we're going to build on today's discussion and talk about how to actually have conversations that lead to change. If you want to learn more about Donjay and his work, we'll include links in the show notes so you can connect with him and learn more about the great work that he's doing. And if you are a church leader looking to grow in how you lead people in stewardship and financial discipleship, I'd encourage you to connect with us by going to our website, christianstewardshipnetwork.com, where you will find resources, in-person virtual events, as well as a community of passionate church leaders, which you can connect with through our CSN membership. And if I can also ask another quick favor, if you're watching this on YouTube, please like, subscribe, and share this video with another church leader, a friend, or family member who will find this helpful. If you're listening to this on your favorite podcast app, leave us a review and share this episode. It's free, and it's the best way that you can help us reach more people with this message of biblical financial stewardship and generosity. Thank you for joining us. We'll see you next time on Stewardship Leader.